This is the Money Talks podcast. Subscribe now on iTunes. Listen to Michael Campbell and Money Talks live on Saturday mornings on CKNW Vancouver, 770 CHQR Calgary, 630 Ched in Edmonton, and live on the Radio Player app.
And if the dam breaks open many years too soon, and if there is no room upon the hill,
today we're featuring the music of Dark Side of the Moon. Actually, it was called Dark Side of the Moon, a piece for assorted lunatics when it was first created. What's so interesting is that they'd actually performed this album the year before it was released to a group of press people at something called the Rainbow Theatre. And they kept doing it on stage in advance of the actual recording of the album and release. But I promised you a shocking stat. This thing went to number one. Very, very hot hit. But think about this. How long was it there? It entered the charts in 1973. It never left the charts till 1988. It was on them for 741 weeks. I mean, that's an astounding record. Of course, it's one of the most successful of all time. But when I read that it was on for 741 consecutive weeks, it also re-entered the charts because there's remasterings and things like that. But my goodness gracious, that's a hit. You get on the charts in 1973 and you're still there in 1988. Time now for this week's quote of the week. Today's quote by T.S. Eliot needs no explanation, so apropos, by the way, is also including my goofy today, would relate to this. I quote, "Half the harm that is done in this world is due to people who want to feel important. They don't mean to do harm, but the harm doesn't interest them. Or they don't see it, or they justify it because they're absorbed in the endless struggle to think well of themselves." My only question is, why did he think it was only half the harm in the world was done to people who want to feel important? Great quote, T.S. Eliot. Very pleased to welcome back to the show Martin Mierenbield, making time for us this weekend. You can find him at Mierenbield & Company, www.mierenbield.com. Martin, I do appreciate you finding time for us, and what a great week to do it with all the sort of noise that we get in the market. This week, of course, about steel tariffs making the news. We've got the Bank of Canada holding steady, and you got the markets in several directions, including the love affair with the U.S. stock markets when they announced that there would be a meeting between Donald Trump and North Korea. I mean, it's just been a wild ride here. Can you make some sense of it for us?
Well, hello, Michael, and thank you for having me on. Yeah, it is a bit of a trick to try to pull this all together. And speaking from the perspective of the gold market, I can tell you, I opened my report this week with the gold market is just a bystander at the moment. It's looking at all these things that are happening, and what can we make out of this, or what can we make out of that? And I'm kind of left to say, well, potentially, if this and this happens, gold would do that, or if that and that happens, gold would do this. So maybe the first thing to say is, if it's really true that Trump, in typical Trumpian fashion, manages to get North Korea to renege on, the nuclear efforts that it's been on. I mean, this would be fantastic. And so I would say one major geopolitical risk comes off the table. And, it's awkward to say this, but when that comes off the table, that's not necessarily so good for the gold price.
Well, that's what I thought was surprising. I mean, on that news, I would have thought that gold would take quite a hit, as you say, but it was much more better described as being a bystander to it all.
That's right, and that's how I saw it. In fact, the U.S. dollar took a little bit of a hit, very small hit on the day this was announced. I think it was Tuesday last, and that kind of kept gold in there. And maybe the market thought, well, if this happens, then any safe haven demand for the U.S. dollar would ease or so. But you're right. That's how I see it. Gold is a bystander to this development, to this potentially very serious development of, a global protectionism. that has a very good chance of playing out very positively for gold. But I don't think we're going to go in this direction. I think the way I interpret Donald Trump's actions is, a lot of sound and fury at the outset, and I'm gonna threaten everybody and the heck with everybody and so forth. And then when it comes down to legislation, he becomes a little bit more reasonable. And as we saw, Canada and Mexico were exempted, which they fully should be. I mean, the whole issue on this protectionism, most everybody should know, it is number one China and number two some of China's, quote, satellite countries. Right? There's the problem. Okay. And so there's no point going out there with across the board tariffs. That just angers all your allies and is economically very regressive. What you want to have is a targeted tariffs if you're going the tariff route, and apply them specifically to the countries that you feel very strongly have been unfair traders. And there's tons of documents to indicate that these Asian countries have been unfair traders.
It's not surprising that we get these sort of big pieces of news any given week, and this week I thought was especially busy with things like the tariff news, the meeting with North Korea, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, we got the U.S. employment numbers, which were extremely strong. Michael Levy was just talking about that, but extremely strong. Right. Having people wonder, is inflation going to be there? Do you have a sense of what the gold market is actually looking at these days? Not all factors obviously impact any different investments. The fact that the Vancouver Canucks are working hard to get a high draft pick has no impact on the markets. Do you know what I mean? So some of this other bits of news seem to have no impact on the markets too. Do you know what the gold market seems to be waiting for or looking at?
Well, I think just to pick up on what Michael said, there probably is, a small corner of the gold market that is looking at inflation. But inflation, in my view, is still some time off if we are going to see any kind of, let's say, 4% inflation. Anything a little bit over 3%, I don't think is going to do very much. One of the things that was very important, and Mike hit it, and I just wanted to support it, is the fact that there was this large group of people that entered the U.S. labor market. It's been my belief that the U.S. labor market is far more elastic than the Fed is thinking, because there's such a low participation rate that the minute the labor market looks good, you've got, thousands of people coming back to the labor market. And the way we see that is because wages won't go up. So that's the point on inflation. The key factor, in our view, and I think in certainly what I'm seeing in the market, is the U.S. dollar. I mean, we have models that, have 5, 6, 7, 8 factors in them. None exceeds the importance of the U.S. dollar.
The trace of that, I know in your work, which people can find at Murenbield.com, and Murenbield is spelled Murenbeeld. That's what the part I wanted to get in. It's a double E. It's Murenbield.
B-E-E. Yep, right.
LD, and they go to .com, and on the Gold Monitor, it's great stuff. You got a lot of different things there, of course, but I love the charts that you show of that correlation. You just overlay it. Look at the gold price, look at the U.S. dollar price, and my goodness, they move. They have a very high correlation when you watch the movements.
Yeah. Now, for last year, for example, there was an almost competitively high correlation, negative then, of gold with tip yields. These are the Treasury inflation-protected security yields, which are basically real interest yields. There was a very strong correlation. That correlation has totally broken down. So those people that hung their hat on the tip yield, and the tip yield has drifted up somewhat this year, and so has gold. They've kind of missed this move on gold because they were expecting maybe that gold would go down. The dollar trumps other factors. And I can tell you, Michael, going back to my early days of looking at the gold market, back for a company that everybody's forgotten in the early 1980s, Little Long Lac Gold Mines, right? One of the first things I said, look at the dollar. Gold is an alternative to the dollar. It moves in an alternative fashion. And at that time, that was not a popular view. People thought I was a bit nuts because I should look at supply and demand and so on. I said, no, it's a financial variable. The dollar is it.
Interesting stuff with Martin Mierenbield. And again, let me spell that, MURENBEELD.com. But you know what the thing is, Martin, you don't know this. We talked to your office, and if people go to moneytalks.net and you look there, right on the front page of moneytalks.net, you can get a free trial of Martin's gold monitor. He also does the economic monitor and the equity and bond observer there, which of course are all key ingredients to anyone's financial well-being. And as I say, the correlations are fascinating. So just go to moneytalks.net and you can get a free trial subscription to Mierenbield and Company's, their services, all of those, or go to the website Mierenbield.com. I'll take a break. I'll come back. Much more to talk about. I'll talk a little bit about interest rates, more on the dollar, gold, that kind of stuff with Martin Mierenbield, and we'll play the lightning round. So all of that's coming your way right here. Featuring the music of Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd. Kind of interesting, by the way, the album was recorded at Abbey Road Studios, obviously the home of the Beatles, but it was recorded in over a year period. In May 1972, January 1973, the band was touring and actually playing the album before it was recorded. I love this, though, that the band, the engineer for the album was Alan Parsons, who at that point had just been an assistant tape operator on, the Beatles, Abbey Road, and Let It Be. But here's the thing. He went on to form the Alan Parsons Project and became a big star in his own right. But as I say, recorded at the Beatles studio. Martin Mierenbield's on the line with me right now, www.mierenbield.com, talking about gold. He talks about the economy. He talks about stocks, bonds, that kind of stuff. We're just talking about the correlation, though, between, you went on to figure out what gold's doing. We'll keep a close eye on what the U.S. dollar is doing. Martin, I mean, we've seen different disconnects in the past, but do you think it's possible really for gold to have a significant move while the U.S. dollar is showing, overwhelming strength, let's say, over a period of time?
It happens rarely, but it has happened a few times, and it's typically around the time of crises. So for example, a few years ago when we had the crises in Europe, and it wasn't clear whether Europe was going to hang together and so forth, there was a flight into U.S. dollars and into gold. Okay, but this typically doesn't happen. It's just in these unusual circumstances where there is a, quote, flight to safety from one area to the United States. And, that people will also buy gold. The overwhelming evidence is that gold and the dollar are negatively correlated and sometimes very highly negatively correlated, like over 0.9. So that's the baby, the dollar.
Do you have a view that sort of just take a longer term view? Are you in that camp that sees that, when gold does move, we're talking in the thousands of dollars, I don't know, 2,500, 5,000, you hear the numbers yourself, but are you in the camp that it will have its day in the sun at some point at least?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that there are some very strong, long-term reasons for gold to go significantly higher. And I've certainly said at various presentations that I think, within the fullness of time, gold is going to take out its high in inflation-adjusted terms of about $2,400. That high was set, as you recall, back in 1980, with gold going up to $850. Now, if you extend $850 out on an inflation basis, it's $2,400-$2,500. I haven't done it recently, but it's about there. Yeah, I think that will happen, but that could be 5 years from now. And one of the key reasons behind that is a global debt. Now, I've been on global debt for, that's been a staple issue in our thinking for at least, 15 years. I mean, back in the early 2000s, you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that at some point all us old people were going to retire, and then the question was, who's going to pay for it all? Right? So this was going to stress budgets. And then in between us now retiring, you got the Great Recession. So you got budgets that are blown out. As you well know, the U.S. has, the highest debt level, that is, the U.S. government has the highest debt level in peacetime history, and some of the largest budget deficits in peacetime history. So, all of that is going to catch up with us one way or another. Okay, and there's one slide I have when I talk about gold. I say, okay, we can take the hit, we can take a depression and reset everything. And how likely do you think it is that the authorities will choose that option? Well, 5%, whatever. It ain't going to happen. What we're going to do is we're going to try and inflate our way out of it. We're going to try and grow out of it. But to grow out of debt, you need nominal growth. Nominal growth has to grow much faster than debt. Well, nominal growth has two components, real growth and inflationary growth. I see where I'm going with that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's sitting out there. So that keeps us. Furthermore, I am also fundamentally somewhat bearish on the dollar. Let me come at this a slightly different fashion.
We only got about a minute here. Yeah.
Okay. One reason you have tariffs is because your currency is overvalued. A tariff is a devaluation by other means. Okay. Yeah, what would have been much better had Trump gone to try and reset the global currency exchange market, as the U.S. has done in history from time to time. Okay, yeah. That would be a better way to go because then, but anyways, that's
interesting stuff. But I mean, hey, that's another great reason that people should go on to moneytalks.net, take advantage, get the free, introductory subscription to Martin Mirabild's, his gold, his bonds, his stocks. It's all interrelated, as you know, but great stuff. Martin, let's finish off quickly with a lightning round. Are you all set with me?
I am, yes.
Okay, here we go. First big investment win.
When I received Dundee stock, so when Dundee bought my company.
Oh, there you go.
Before that, I can't remember.
Favorite long-haul airline?
2, KLM and Singapore.
Favorite movie star when you were growing up?
Alan Ladd.
Favorite Olympic sport? Did you watch the Olympics this year or in the Summer Olympics?
Oh, yes. Figure skating.
Members of your dream foursome. You play a lot of golf. Who are the other 3 members in your dream foursome?
Well, you're going to be surprised. Michael Campbell, Victor Adair, and Phil Mickelson.
Well, my gosh, sign me up right away. Most fun fiction book you've read in the last 5 years?
Any book by an author that people may not know well, Carl Hiaasen. He writes really funny stories about crazy people living in Florida.
Great stuff. What was your best subject in high school?
Math.
I'll give you a choice of pet: dog, cat, canary, or goldfish.
Used to be dog, but we babysat my son's cat, and I've fallen in love with the cat.
There you go. If you're worried about your waistline, if you weren't worried about your waistline, your health, your heart disease, anything, what's your favorite dessert?
Actually, very simple. A ball of vanilla ice cream with some chocolate sauce on top.
Oh, and my mouth is watering. Martin, thank you so much for finding time for us again. Mirrenbield.com. Martin, thank you.
You're more than welcome. Always enjoyable. Have a
great
good weekend,
stuff.
Mike.
Thank you. Great stuff with Martin Mirrenbield. And again, go to moneytalks.net. Take advantage of this, a free introductory offer. Go ahead, sign on. So many good things. I alluded to some of the charts there, but this is the kind of stuff that you need to help you in your investment process there. I'll take a break. I'll come back. You've got to hear my shocking stat. Must hear. Stay with me.
All that you touch and all that you see, all that you taste, all you feel, and all that you love.
Dark Side of the Moon. We're featuring it today. Hey, by the way, a big shout out to Sherry Johnson. Never misses a show. Glad you're so with us, Sherry. I know there's some very nice people listening to this show. I mentioned the hate mail on occasion, but I know the vast majority of people, whether they agree or not, are very respectful. Enjoy at least the dialogue and the guests like Martin Mirrenbield. Also, Nick Bennett, by the way, thanks for your thoughts on the nature of free speech. Much appreciated. Time now for this week's shocking stat of the week. This is the number, $1.7 million. That's the amount that BC Supreme Court Justice Robert Punnett awarded a Nanaimo couple, Tony and Helen Samaru. You maybe heard it in court. It was in civil court. It's a judgment against the Canada Revenue Agency. The shocking part, though, is this. That's the conduct of the CRA personnel involved in this case, who the Supreme Court Justice called high-handed, reprehensible, and malicious. The justice found that the CRA suppressed and misstated the evidence. It's like a nightmare. He went on to state in quotes, the manner in which the prosecution was initiated and carried out was egregious, and in the process ruined the reputations and indeed the lives of the couple. It violated fundamental rights and was highly reprehensible. This is the Canada Revenue Agency personnel involved. And here's the part that I've been warning about. This is the part why I think everyone should be paying attention. With the federal Liberals putting more money and power in the hands of the CRA employees, the judge stated this, the case involved the power imbalance of the state over the individual. For a country full of people, full of politicians who can't wait to tell us what's fair, there is nothing fair in your dealing with Canada Revenue Agency. It's inherently unfair. Why? Well, people who have not had the misfortune of being audited don't seem to get this, but it is David versus Goliath. The state has unlimited funds to go after individuals, thanks to you, the taxpayer. And what shocks most Canadians, that in this process, you are deemed to be guilty and must prove your innocence. And proving that innocence is expensive, too expensive for most Canadians, so they settle. Numerous tax lawyers have told me it has little to do with guilt or innocence and much more to do with financial reality that the government plain has more money. And you keep the process on and can keep the conquest going for years. I mean, look at the Nanaimo couple. That was a 10-year deal. And the CRA still wants more. But the vast majority of Canadians cannot afford this. So it is not about justice. It is about financial wherewithal for which the government has a never-ending supply of money. The Supreme Court Justice called the conduct of the CRA employees involved appalling. But again, more importantly, he suggested that the Nanaimo case was not one-off and instead reflected, in quotes, an unfortunate culture within the CRA. Writing in the Globe and Mail this week, tax expert Tim Sesnick states, if you take the time to speak to tax professionals around the country, you'll hear many stories of a changing culture at the CRA. I'm talking about a shift from using common sense to resolve issues early in the dispute process to forcing taxpayers to file notices of objection or notices of appeal because frontline CRA employees simply refuse to listen to logical explanations. Prominent tax lawyer David Rotfleisch says, in quotes, some tax audits seem like make-work projects or a game of chicken. If you get audited, you can expect to get put through the wringer by CRA auditors who defy logic and reason, even when presented with clear evidence of no wrongdoing, end of quote. This is what I've been warning about. And it's getting worse. I've talked to lots of tax professionals, and I continually hear the same story. And it should scare the hell out of you. You might be next. Here's the clincher, though. I just talked about a 10-year battle here in court. You know what? After this massive legal review, the CRA is continuing to go after the Nanaimo couple. 10 years. Armed with the same evidence that the Supreme Court so thoroughly discredited. All made possible by your tax dollars. Outrageous. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Revenue Minister Lepotillier, excuse the pronunciation, have done nothing. While Tim Sesnick and virtually every other tax professional points out the CRA has become increasingly confrontational to the point of bullying. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that story. That's why I've been bringing it up. Well, it's time for our government, under Mr. Trudeau, under the Revenue Minister, to step up. This is unacceptable. It erodes support for government, undermines Canada as a nation. It's got to end. When I wrote this last night, was thinking about it last night rather, I got so angry I couldn't sleep. This should not be happening. This is ultimate bullying going on. It is David versus Goliath. They have all the money, and there is no recourse here. If they go down the wrong track, so what? They don't pay any financial penalties. We as taxpayers do. That $1.7 million for what the judge called egregious prosecution, malicious prosecution. There is no financial penalty to the people involved. They have unlimited funds. and they go after individuals who have very limited funds. This is profoundly unfair, and yet it gets nothing but a yawn. If you're in the NDP and you're in the Conservative, you should be pressing on behalf of Canadians on this issue. Liberal members of Parliament should be pressing on behalf of Canadians. Somebody in that political system, better still, everybody, should be speaking on behalf of Canadians on this issue. Breathe, one of the great songs from Dark Side of the Moon. We're featuring it because it was released 35 years ago this 2-week period, actually, because the UK and the United States. What a monster hit. 741 consecutive weeks on the charts. Drew Zimmerman joins me right now from PI International, live from the trading desk. Hey, Drew, we were talking earlier with Mike Levy. I don't even know if you were born then. I'm just kidding. But the bull market in stocks starting 9 years ago. It's been an incredible run. Of course, it doesn't go up in a straight line, but wow, what a finish this Friday with a 400-plus point move in the Dow.
Oh, it's been an incredible move, and I have been alive for it. I have been in business the whole time, but
well, you've been in business a heck of a lot of it, and you've seen that move, especially, of course, and it reverberates through all the markets. But it is just an incredible thing. This 9 years and counting.
Oh, exactly. And I mean, we got the proverbial cherry on top with the employment reports that we got on Friday. We had a huge number, as Michael was talking about as well. But maybe more importantly was we didn't have wage pressures, and that's really what the market's been looking for. Where is inflation? Where is the wage pressure? If we have this full employment, almost a 4.1 unemployment rate, why aren't people getting paid more if we have all these people going to work? And, that question allowed the stock market to run up because there was less fear that the Fed has got to really start ticking up interest rates faster than otherwise expected. So the big question really that the market is looking at is, yes, the economic picture is looking better all the time, but at the same time, do we have a Fed that has to raise rates 3 times, 4 times, or maybe even more? And if we get put back on the 3 times that the market's already priced in and expecting, that gives the market just more room to run.
And I just want to get your take on the Canadian dollar. I know you do so much work within the currencies and the crude market too. Another interesting week because, again, one of these macro stories comes out, steel tariffs, no steel tariffs on Canada, steel tariffs on the rest of the world, NAFTA negotiations. And sort of, if I'd closed my eyes for the last couple of weeks, I think the Canadian dollar is right back where it was at that sort of 78-cent mark.
Yeah, Canada back at 78 cents. I want to really drive home a key point that Victor always talks about on the show. I mean, it's great that you have him on as much as you do, and a really key thing for listeners to understand is time frame. There's so many different things to talk about when it comes to currencies. Are we talking about the move lower by the end of next week? Are we talking about where we're going to be a month from now? Or, are you talking about bigger trends where you need to be positioned for a Canadian dollar that's much lower 6 months from now? And I think what we're facing and what we've seen ever since, call it the last month and a half, Canada moving back from 81 cents to, we hit new 8-month lows this week, but did close at 78 cents as the tariff scenario sort of got pushed off the table for Canada anyways. So that was a little bullish going into the end of the week. But what I really want to try and focus on here this week is there has been a shift between Canada and the United States, and without trying to get into politics, a lot of it does come down to policy deregulation, tax policy, and the overall competitiveness as us as a nation, and whether it's the CRA story you were just talking about and other things like that, Canada has become less competitive than our southern neighbor, and I view the currency as that relief valve. What will help us be competitive again? A currency that moves lower, that will bring investment back to Canada if we can produce things and ship them out to the world with a cheaper dollar. So over the more, call it medium to longer term view, I think we really need to be careful of Canada being much lower. I think we've got a Bank of Canada that is going to be way more gradual in raising rates than what we're going to see south of the border. That, again, leads into interest rate differentials, which is going to be key for the currency going forward. But again, just trying to get that time frame very in sync with the way that we're looking at the market.
Those two great points, though, as your first one about time frame. That's so important when people hear what the markets are going to do, think short-term, mid-term, long-term. I think it's great stuff. I love that about the Canadian dollar, though, given that our governments aren't looking, and we just had a federal budget. It did not add anything to make us more competitive in light of the Trump tax cuts, regularity cuts. So the dollar picks up that slack by dropping. It, of course, makes our goods more competitive. Interesting stuff. Time for just one real quick word, if I can get from you, on crude oil.
Yeah, crude oil had a $3.50 range, was jumping around, but really came out of the week unchanged. I mean, you had Martin really talk about gold. It had the same sort of a week, some volatility, but came out unchanged. I think just as gold, I think the U.S. dollar is going to be very key to where the price of oil goes. It really does seem to be, we've got ramping up U.S. production, but at the same time, better economic picture globally, upping demand. Who's going to win there? Is the U.S. production really going to be as big as we think it might? And if you have any U.S. dollar strength, I think that really pressures what is a very large speculative long position in the crude market.
Are you looking for like a number that sort of would pop out? As you just said, we may get a lot of people liquidating their positions. They're into crude oil right now. Maybe they liquidate and drop things down a bit. Do you have sort of a lower end of that scale that you're looking at short term?
Near term, I'm looking at the $58 mark. That was the low that we were at the end of February. I really think that if we return to that level and go through it, then I really think you have to look at near term at least 55, more likely down to the low 50s. Like I say, there's just a wall of selling that could come into that market if we really see some new lows in the market.
Well, at the very least, it's going to be very, very interesting there. Drew, thanks for finding time for us. Of course, Derivative Portfolio Manager, PI International, PolarFuturesGroup.com, though, PolarFuturesGroup.com. My thanks, Drew.
Thanks for having me on, Mike.
Great stuff. Take a break. I'll come back. I got a Goofy Award. This is one of the things I always say that, people are busy with their normal lives, but there's a couple of things that things are moving on here. They are going to impact you, and we all have to get involved. That's the context for my Goofy. Stay with us. Maybe you saw it in a planetarium where they used the background Dark Side of the Moon in a planetarium show, but my goodness, has that album ever been prevalent, whether it's, of course, Pink Floyd's many, many concerts throughout the world, throughout the years, but of course, I know had a couple of contacts from listeners already who said they watched it at the planetarium in the city where they live. So yes, monster hit. We've been featuring Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd this week. Why? Because it's the 55-year anniversary, 45-year anniversary of its release. I'm going to get that right at some point. 45-year anniversary of its release. My thanks, by the way, to our technical producer, Amir Ali, who makes the things run so smoothly. My thanks, Amir. Also, a reminder, go to Michael Campbell's Money Talks on Facebook. Get in the habit of doing that. Go to moneytalks.net. Click on for the Martin Mirabile free subscription to get introduced to his wonderful services and so many other great articles of the week. So please get in the habit of doing that. I very appreciate you listening. I'll see you next week.